The year was 1978. Disco ruled the airwaves, but rock wasn't dead yet. You lived through it, danced to it, maybe even made out to it. These 10 songs dominated the charts that year, but what you probably didn't know could change how you remember them forever. Let's dig into the real stories. The Bee Gees weren't always disco kings. Barry, Robin, and Maurice started as a folk trio in 1958 when Barry was just 11 years old. Their original sound was heavily influenced by the Beatles and the Everly Brothers. But here's what might shock you. By the mid-70s, they were considered washed-up has-beens. Their manager fired them, their record label dropped them, and critics wrote them off as yesterday's news. The brothers were so broke that Barry was sleeping on floors and Robin was battling severe depression. Then came Saturday Night Fever, and suddenly these supposed failures became the biggest act in the world. Most people think How Deep Is Your Love was written specifically for the movie soundtrack, but that's completely wrong. The Bee Gees had already recorded it before they even knew about Saturday Night Fever. When Robert Stigwood asked them to contribute to the film, they simply pulled this track from their vault. Even more surprising, this song was initially rejected by several artists, including Yvonne Elliman, who later recorded another Bee Gees composition that same year. The brothers almost didn't include it on the soundtrack because they thought it was too soft for disco audiences. Player formed in 1977 when session musicians Peter Beckett and J.C. Crowley decided they were tired of making other people's dreams come true. Both had spent years as backing musicians for major acts. Beckett had worked with various British rock bands after moving from Liverpool, while Crowley had been grinding it out in the LA session scene. What's controversial about their story is how they allegedly lifted their entire sound from demos that other struggling musicians had shopped around town. Several songwriters claim that Player's success came from borrowing ideas that had been floating around the LA music scene for years, though nothing was ever proven in court. The real kicker about Baby Come Back is it was recorded in keyboardist Wayne Cook's home studio in his garage. The entire production budget was less than $500, including the cost of the demo tapes. Cook used a primitive 4-track recorder and some borrowed equipment to capture what would become their biggest hit. Even stranger, the song sat unfinished for months because the band couldn't afford studio time to complete it. When they finally scraped together enough money to finish the recording, and within weeks, it was climbing the charts. The garage where it was recorded still stands in Los Angeles, now used as a storage unit. This track reveals the dark side of the Bee Gees' disco domination. While the world saw them as untouchable hitmakers, behind the scenes, they were battling fierce creative differences and personal demons. Maurice was drinking heavily. Robin had temporarily quit the band twice during the Saturday Night Fever sessions, and Barry was under crushing pressure to maintain their momentum. The brothers barely spoke to each other outside of the studio, and industry insiders knew they were one blow-up away from permanently splitting up, which would have killed the goose that laid the golden eggs for their entire business empire. Here's something that would have blown your mind in 1978. Stayin' Alive was one of the last songs recorded for the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. The Bee Gees threw it together in about 4 hours because they needed one more up-tempo number to fill out the album. Barry created that famous bass line by accident while tuning his guitar, and they decided to build a song around it on the spot. The original working title was Saturday Night, but they changed it because they thought it was too obvious. The song that defined an entire era was basically an afterthought that almost didn't make it onto the album. Before we continue, drop your comment and tell us about the memories this brings back. And while you're down there, smash that like button if you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes stories. Trust me, the next ones will surprise you even more. Andy Gibb's story is probably the most tragic of all the artists we're discussing today. The youngest of the 4 Gibb brothers, Andy was just 19 when he first hit number 1, making him the closest thing to a teen pop sensation that disco ever produced. But here's what the record company kept hidden. Andy was already showing signs of serious substance abuse by 1978. While his older brothers struggled with their own issues, Andy's problems were on another level entirely. Industry executives knew he was unreliable and often showed up to the recording sessions high or drunk, but his pretty boy image and natural talent made him too valuable to drop. The recording sessions for Thicker Than Water were notorious within the industry. Andy reportedly did most of his vocal takes while under the influence, and producer Albie Galutin had to piece together usable performances from dozens of attempts. Even more shocking, Andy didn't write this song. His brothers Barry and Maurice did, and they sang the background vocals because Andy couldn't coordinate his harmonies properly. The final version you heard on the radio was heavily doctored with studio effects that had to hide the fact that Andy's voice was often shaky and unfocused during recording. Insiders called it the most expensive cover-up job in disco history. By the time Night Fever hit the charts, the Bee Gees had become prisoners of their own success. They couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed, and the pressure to maintain their disco image was destroying their mental health. What most people don't know is that all three brothers wanted to return to their rock roots, but their record label threatened to sue them if they deviated from the disco formula. They were contractually obligated to produce disco hits or face massive financial penalties. The brothers felt trapped in a genre they were growing to resent, even as it made them millions. Night Fever contains a production secret that audiophiles still debate today. If you listen carefully with really good headphones, you can hear what sounds like a fourth voice in the harmonies during the chorus. For years, fans speculated it was a studio musician or a heavily processed vocal effect. The truth is even more interesting. It's actually Andy Gibb, who happened to be in the studio that day and stepped up to the microphone. The brothers liked how it sounded, but never gave him official credit because it would have complicated their publishing arrangements. Andy's voice is literally embedded in his brother's biggest disco hit, but almost nobody knew it at the time. Yvonne Elliman's path to stardom was unlike any other artist of the disco era. She was discovered by Andrew Lloyd Webber while performing in a London hair salon of all places. She was styling hair by day and singing in small clubs by night when Webber heard her and immediately cast her as Mary Magdalene in the original Jesus Christ Superstar. But here's the controversy. Elliman later claimed that both Webber and Tim Rice made inappropriate advances toward her during the production, and that her refusal to play along cost her better roles in subsequent musicals. The entertainment industry was brutal to women in the 70s, and Elliman paid the price for standing her ground. The recording of If I Can't Have You almost didn't happen. Originally, the Bee Gees had planned to keep this song for themselves, but their record label insisted they needed material for Yvonne, who was still riding high from her Jesus Christ Superstar success. What's remarkable is that Elliman recorded her vocal in just 2 takes, unprecedented for such a complex disco production. The first take was nearly perfect, but engineer Carl Richardson convinced her to do one more for safety. That second take became the version that hit number 1. Richardson later admitted he could have released either version and achieved the same result, calling Elliman the most naturally gifted vocalist he'd ever worked with. We're halfway through our countdown, and I bet you're starting to see 1978 in a completely different light. These weren't just songs. They were survival stories, business battles, and personal struggles that somehow created the soundtrack to your youth. If this is bringing back memories, share this video with someone who was there with you. And hit that subscribe button because next week we're diving into the scandals behind 1979's biggest hits. You won't believe what really happened behind those studio doors. Johnny Mathis was already 20 years into his career by 1978, but what most people don't realize was that he was fighting his own battles with Columbia Records over creative control. The label wanted him to embrace disco to stay relevant, while Mathis preferred his smooth ballad style. This duet with Denise Williams was actually a compromise, a way for Mathis to dip his toe in contemporary waters without fully abandoning his signature sound. The controversial part? Columbia executives privately worried that Mathis's rumored sexuality could hurt record sales if it became public knowledge. So, Too Much, Too Little, Too Late was pushed as a male-female duet for image management. The chemistry between Mathis and Williams was genuine, but the recording process was anything but smooth. They recorded their vocal parts separately and in different cities. Williams laid down her tracks in Los Angeles, while Mathis recorded his in New York weeks later. Producer Jack Gold had to work magic in the mixing process to make it sound like they were actually singing together in the same room. Even more interesting, Williams had no idea who Mathis was when she first agreed to the collaboration. She was a young R&B artist who'd never heard his classic ballads, and she later admitted she thought he was just another session singer, until someone explained his legendary status. The success of this duet created a behind-the-scenes power struggle that nearly destroyed both careers. While Grease was breaking box office records, John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John were feuding over who deserved top billing for their musical collaborations. Travolta's ego was already inflated from Saturday Night Fever, and he couldn't stand sharing the spotlight with anyone. Olivia Newton-John, meanwhile, was dealing with her own image crisis. She was a country pop artist who felt trapped in a teen movie persona. Their personal tension was so obvious that director Randall Kleiser had to shoot multiple takes of their scenes because they couldn't fake chemistry convincingly. Nobody expected You're the One That I Want to become a hit. It wasn't even supposed to be in the movie originally. The song was written specifically for the film adaptation after the stage musical songs were deemed not commercial enough for mainstream radio. John Farrar wrote it in his living room over a weekend, and the demo was recorded on his home tape deck. When executives heard it, they immediately knew it was potential gold. The irony is that this throwaway song, created to replace superior musical theater compositions, became bigger than any of the original Grease stage numbers ever were. By 1978, Andy Gibb's personal life was spiraling completely out of control, but his management team worked overtime to keep his clean-cut image intact. Behind the scenes, Andy was burning through money, missing recording sessions, and alienating everyone who tried to help him. The controversial truth is that his brothers and their management company were enabling his destructive behavior because he was generating too much income to sideline. They knew he was headed for a crash, but the money was too good to stop the machine. Shadow Dancing was actually pieced together from fragments recorded over several months because Andy was rarely in any condition to complete a full song in one session. Producer Albie Galutin became expert at capturing Andy's vocals in short bursts when he was coherent and sober enough to sing. The backing track was recorded entirely by session musicians because Andy couldn't coordinate with other players anymore. Most shocking of all, the song's signature falsetto wasn't even Andy's natural voice. It was achieved through careful studio manipulation and pitch correction, techniques that were cutting edge in 1978 but primitive by today's standards.
I've been hanging out so long, I've been sleeping all alone.
The Rolling Stones recording Miss You represented a seismic shift for the band, and not everyone was happy about it. This was their first real attempt at incorporating disco elements, and it created massive tensions within the group. Keith Richards openly hated the direction and felt it was selling out their rock and roll legacy. Mick Jagger, however, was fascinated by Studio 54's scene and wanted to capture that energy. The band nearly broke up during these sessions, with Richards threatening to quit if they continued down this disco path. Only the intervention of producer Chris Kimsey kept them together. Here's something that would have scandalized conservative America in 1978. Miss You was directly inspired by Jagger's experiences at gay clubs in New York City. He'd been frequenting underground venues where disco was evolving, watching how music could make people move in ways that rock never could. The song's groove was specifically designed to work in those club environments. When asked about it in interviews, Jagger would deflect and gave vague answers about New York nightlife, but insiders knew exactly which clubs he was talking about. The Rolling Stones had created their most mainstream hit by drawing inspiration from America's most underground music scene. So there you have it, the real stories behind the songs that defined your disco years. You lived through one of the most misunderstood eras in music history. While critics dismissed disco as shallow, you knew these songs had real emotion and genuine artistry. And now you know just how much drama, controversy, and raw human experience went into creating them. If these stories surprised you, imagine what secrets are hiding behind the hits from every other year of your youth. Make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started digging into the music industry's hidden history. And share this with your friends. I guarantee at least one of these stories will shock them as much as it probably shocked you. Next time you hear any of these songs, you'll never think about any of them the same way again.